This morning my sermon is entitled Sons of Thunder. And a little bit of a preview going into this. I love football. I especially love watching high school football. The pros, ever since they quit standing for the national anthem, I quit watching the pros altogether. I figure if they don't have enough respect for our country to do that, then I'm not going to watch them. But many of you know that I was a massage therapist, but you may not have known that I had volunteered with the Poland Bulldogs for 13 years. I worked on their injuries. I worked on their, gave them massages before the, warm-up massages before the games and things like that. And the one thing I can say for myself is that I never had an athlete go down with any cramps in their legs that I worked on before the game. So I should have done a research on that, but I didn't do it. But I did keep track of it, and anybody that I ever worked on never went down with a cramp in their leg or anything like that. So, and I did it. I did it first and foremost, probably to promote my business, but I also wanted to show my support for the community. I got involved in a way of meeting people and showing that support. But I was a fan foremost. All my kids graduated from Poland, and I love to watch and root for the players, and I love to be involved with the players and encourage them. And you're there to experience their struggles and rejoice in their successes. But I also gleaned a lot from that. I gleaned a lot of, people thought that high school was just full of a bunch of rich prudes, and the kids always were respectful to me. And I only had trouble with one child, and he ended up ultimately getting expelled from the school. That's what happened to him. So, but that was the only thing that I had happen. And I became a better massage therapist for it too, because I got a lot of experience working on different injuries and different muscles and doing things like that. So it was that, and it also grew my business to a point that it was pretty good. So. And I was lucky. I had a bird's eye view down on the sidelines. I learned very quickly that each team has its own group of fans. Everybody on the field has people who are there to root them on. Everybody has someone there to shout out words of encouragement and support to all their teammates, their team, and to be behind their team. And that's expected of the one group. You're always the one team or the other. You're never for both teams. And one group of people on the team on the field that has no rooting for them, nobody rooting for them from the bleachers. And who might you think that would be? That would be the referees. Yeah, the referees are, nobody ever says to them, "Great call, ref." Nobody ever approaches them after the game for their autograph. Nobody takes them out to dinner after the game, buys them a sandwich. And even if the refs do a good job and call the game the way we would have, the best we can do is tolerate them. But more often we abuse them because they're obviously idiots. Otherwise they have called the game and saw it the way we did. One night the refs were calling the game the way some of the crowd thought they shouldn't have went. The crowd was angry, and you could have heard things like, "What, are you blind? How could you miss that call? Hey ref, who paid you to throw this game? You got a relative playing on the other team?" And then I paused for a minute after I heard those things, and I thought, that was sometimes me. When I went to sporting events, I would do that sometimes, not thinking about it. But we weren't allowed on the sidelines. When I was on the sidelines, the only people who was allowed to get mad at the referees was the coaches. You couldn't say anything or do anything. You could boo. If you wanted to boo, you could do that. But I'd done that many times before, screaming out those insults. And that night I heard something like a little person, you know, like that little angel that sits on this side and the little devil that sits on this side, and they're always bickering back and forth, trying to tell you what to do. And I heard the people hurling those insults, and I had some somewhat of a come to Jesus experience. It was almost as if I stepped up in the stands and was sitting among the fans and went along with them shouting out those insults, which I had done in the past, and thought about the times that I had done that and felt a little bit of ashamed. Then that voice seemed to echo in my ear. You know that little angel, like I said, sits on your shoulder and a devil. And the conversation went something like this. Doug, what do you think you're doing? I'm just doing what I felt like doing. I felt that he didn't do a right call, so I yelled at him. But do you realize who you are? Yes, I'm a serious fan. I want my team to win. But do you realize that you're a Christian in a small city, small town, and just about everybody here knows you, which was true. You treat a lot of the people that you're among in those stands. And there you are harassing those poor referees. They can't possibly be paid enough to endure the abuse you're heaping on them. But did you see that call? He wasn't out of bounds. Excuse after excuse could go on and on. But the Bible leaves us no room for excuse in Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupt words proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearer. But I know that's what the Bible says. But this is the issue. Don't you realize who you are? We have to think about that. We have to think about who we are when we do things. And in the end, I thought to myself, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I'm a Christian. And I shouldn't be acting like that. And when that realization comes to you, when you really realize that you're doing something wrong and you're dead wrong, then you as a Christian are to set an example for the world. And I had the experience of going to 2 of my granddaughter's basketball games. And I felt that urge to speak up a couple times. But I thought about this experience and I remembered who I was. So I just let all the other parents make fools of themselves. And I just sit back and watched. You may have seen this ring I'm wearing this morning one time or another, maybe. I'm not sure whether you have or not. But in 1999, the Poland football team was the first team to have a 15-0 record and went and won the state championship. And then don't jump me after the thing and said, well, they're not the only ones that ever went undefeated. I know that, but that was the year that they changed the high school rules and they had to play 15 games instead of 12. So they were the very first to win 15 games and go on to win the state championship. And as I look back on those experiences, and when I pull this ring out every now and then and I put it on my finger, the coaches made sure that me and the team doctor got a ring. They made sure that they got that for us, and I was very proud of that. My kids were very proud of that. And at the time I was doing very well, and I could upgrade it to a different carat of gold. And my son said, Dad, it's only going to be a one-time experience. You got to do that. So I did. I got the best one I could get, which is probably wasn't the right thing to do, maybe. I'm not sure. But the experience I had with that, and I hope I was an influence on people, because people knew that I was a Christian. People knew that I did preaching part-time at that time. And when I see those kids out in public and they walk up to me, can't remember their names, but I seen one in Lowe's the other day, in fact. So, he walked up to me and started talking to me, and I really felt good. And the example I'm trying to get across to you is, no matter where we're at or what we're doing, we have to remember who we are. Ask yourself, do you really realize who you are? Because if you're out in public, and I've been with people that were supposed Christians, been going out for a day of doing something, go into a shop or something. I went into a guy, with a guy into a tire shop, and he got so upset with the owner, I thought he was going to punch him in the face. And I'm thinking, now we're supposed to be Christians. We're supposed to be able to do that kind of stuff without doing that. And how you behave at a football game, or how you behave when you become under pressure or agitated in the world, that's when the world is watching us. James and John had that excuse. In Mark 3:17, we're told that Jesus gave them the name Sons of Thunder. Their nickname declared, these are men referees and umpires dread. These are men who were quick to judge and harsh in their words. These were men who called them the way they saw it, and they called them loudly. Generally, we don't think of James and John as that kind of sharp-tongued people. After all, they were disciples of Jesus. And while the Bible doesn't tell us much more about James and John, John is often known as the disciple of love. John wrote things like, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. Whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. 1 John 3:14. And again he wrote, knowing God through love. Behold, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love God does not know God, for God is love. And that's in 1 John 4:7-8. And yet again he also wrote, we love him because he first loved us. Obedience by faith. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also. Those are decent words and important attitudes. Those are godly attitudes. But those weren't the attitudes John was displaying that day in Samaria in Luke 9:51-54. They were walking into this Samaritan village and they rejected the Savior. Now it came to pass when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem and sent messengers before his face. And as they went, they entered a village of Samaritan to prepare for him. But they did not receive him because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. And when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them just as Elijah did? Call fire down. Were these men suffering from a delusion of grandeur? Why would they think they could call fire? Well, probably they had the power to do that because they were given that power by Jesus when they went out. If you turn back to the beginning of Luke on chapter 9, verses 1-6, you'll find that Jesus had turned his disciples loose to preach on their own. And they healed people, they cast out demons, and they knew just about what they had as far as power. They tasted real power from on high, and they thought to themselves, we can take care of these, we can just take this city out. We can take them guys out. Here they were on their way to Jerusalem, probably for the last time. But they really don't know that. And what they do know is that Jesus is more serious than usual. Verse 51, steadfastly looking towards Jerusalem is what he was doing. He had a thing in mind that he had to do. There's something about the look in his eye, maybe the set of his jaw. Something was different about him than usual. And I suspect they were a little ill at ease, sensing that something was wrong, but they weren't sure what. Then on their journey through Samaria, On their way to Jerusalem, they came to this petty, insignificant, out-of-the-way Samaritan village that has the supreme bad attitude and manners of actually rejecting their master. James and John literally came out of their seats. Are you blind? Do you need to borrow my glasses? Don't you know who this is? This is Jesus, the man who's fed thousands with few loaves and fishes. The man who raised the dead, healed the sick, cast out demons, and you have the nerve to turn him away. And they say to Jesus, let us call down fire and wipe them out. These flimsy excuses for human beings. They don't deserve to even breathe the same air that you do. They were angry because they weren't respecting Jesus, which they should have been, really, but Jesus, being the loving person that he was, he knew that they were doing wrong. In a Bible college, one of the professors was especially liked. He was a humble, gentle, grandfatherly man that more than once would openly cry when something touched his heart. One night at a basketball game, about in the middle of the game, the refs missed an obvious, flagrant foul. The crowd was stunned into silence. This being a Bible college, it seemed improper to shout insults at the referee. The fans just sat there in silence, and in the midst of that silence, one voice rang out. Are you blind? Can't you see anything? Here, take my glasses, maybe you'll see better. Everyone knew who that voice belonged to. It belonged to that beloved professor. The crowd was not sure of to be shocked by the bad call or to be shocked by this dear man that they respected actually hurling insults at the referees. Many of them smiled, but they were all a little startled. It was totally out of character for him. For a moment in that intensity of the game, this gentle, humble, grandfatherly professor forgot who he was. And that's what actually happened to James and John. They just forgot who they were. They let their anger take over. And when Jesus turned to look at them, I don't think he was smiling. In fact, he treated them to a religious experience. He rebuked them, and I suspect that when Jesus rebukes you, you knew you'd been rebuked. I can picture Jesus saying to them, how could you be with me so long and get this so wrong? Now these were actually disciples of Jesus that knew him. They lived with him. They ate with him. They did everything with him. This wasn't how they were supposed to act. They were being true to their nickname that he gave them, Sons of Thunder. I suspect there's a little of James and John in each one of us. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you got angry with a sales clerk or a waitress or a waiter and maybe said some choice words to that person? And if it weren't for the fact that we were Christians, most people wouldn't think much of it, really, because that's how the world acts. They wouldn't think much of it when we behave badly at a basketball game or a football game, or behave badly behind the wheel of our car, or behave badly with people we don't much like. If people didn't know we were Christians, it probably wouldn't much matter. I suspect that's why a lot of Christians don't put Christian bumper stickers on their cars. Because when they get angry in traffic, they don't want to have anybody thinking they're a Christian. I like when I see the fish on the back of the car, and then they do something, or you do something to them, and they don't act very Christian-like. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. If people didn't know we were Christians, it just wouldn't matter. If I belong to Jesus, I can't behave like I would really like to sometimes. And that's why we don't put bumper stickers on our cars sometimes. When we find ourselves behaving like James and John did there in Samaria, it's often because we don't know the people we're insulting. It's somehow okay if they're anonymous and we don't know them very well, or we don't know them at all. Or we can behave like that if we do know them and they deserve everything we can say or do to them. Sometimes we use that as an excuse. It's interesting, but after this confrontation with Jesus, James and John are never shown to act like this again. I suspect this may be because they suddenly realized from this rebuke what they were doing to Jesus in the acts of what they were doing. They suddenly understood that Jesus stood for what he stood for and why their words would offend him. And the only reason you and I control how we act is when we understand the same things that James and John did right there at that moment. They understood that they were Jesus's and they should act like Jesus would act. I want to leave you with this little story. A young lady named Sally related an experience she had in class, given by her Sunday school teacher, Mr. Smith. She said Brother Smith was known for his elaborate object lessons. One particular day, Sally walked into the class and knew they were in for another fun day. On the wall was a big target, and on a nearby table were many darts. The teacher told the students to draw a picture of someone that they disliked or someone who had made them angry, and he would allow them to throw darts at the person's picture. Sally's girlfriend on her right drew a picture of the girl who had stolen her boyfriend. Another friend on her lap drew a picture of his little brother. Sally drew a picture of Mr. Smith, putting a great deal of detail into her drawing. Sally was pleased at the overall effect she had achieved. The class lined up and began throwing darts. Everybody had fun and laughed at each dart found its mark. Some of the students threw the darts so forcefully that the target was ripped apart. Sally looked forward to her turn and was filled with disappointment when Brother Smith, because of time limits, asked the students to return to their seats. As Sally sat thinking about how angry she was because she didn't have a chance to throw any darts at her target, the teacher began removing the targets from the wall, and underneath the target was a picture of Jesus. A complete hush fell over the room as each student viewed the mangled picture of Jesus. Holes and jagged marks covered his face. His eyes were pierced out. Mr. Smith said only these few words before he dismissed his class. Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did to one of these, the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Matthew 25:40. We have to realize that when we're out in life and we have a dispute with someone and we act like a total idiot, that we're portraying exactly what Satan wants us to portray. Jesus wants us to portray an altogether different picture. He wants us to portray a picture of love. And believe me, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to do that at all. Remember who you are. And this morning you have an opportunity to change who you are if you're not happy with who you are. And if you're not a baptized Christian, I would hope that you weren't happy with yourself. If you have a need to be baptized this morning, we can do that for you. Or if you have a need to come back to God and to get prayers at a church, we can pray with you. Come as we stand and sing.
When we walk with